Hello, my name is Dagam Lako, and I'll be doing this presentation with Olivia Height. We will both each talking about each section that we both for this presentation, and this presentation is about the impact of wildfires on Washington, or in Washington, I should say. So first, let's get into a little bit of history of wildfires, mostly just in America. So wildfires in the United States have been increasing from 1980 to the current time, as reported by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. This is where this graph is from, as in like they provided this for us. As you can see, though, with the graph that the number of wildfires has not increased. Actually, it's pretty normal throughout. The graph is around the same level as it was. Like there's not more uptick or lower uptick between them. Just to with less confusion, the Forest Services one is a different data set uh, that that they were able to collect back in the day, but that service was canceled in around the 1996, so that's why it doesn't continue on anymore. Where the National Interagency Fire Center is their most recent one and the one that is constantly being used. So this to clarify that. So with this indication of like how has it been increasing, then you must be asking like how has fires been increasing but the amount of fires have not. This is interesting, as it's the severity of the wildfires that have been increasing. Just how much damage that they do, how much acres that they burned has been increasing, as you can show by this graph here, where as you can see the amount of acres burned or area burned per million acres has increased steadily throughout the year, right? Where in 2005 it was around like 10 million, but in the highest in the 1990s was like around 6 million. So there was a 4 million increase just right there in general. And as you can tell with the graph, you can put a trend line on it, it's just increasing little by little by little, right? And this has us asking, it's like, how come this was the case? How was it able to increase this heavily throughout the years, right? And what we found out is that it actually is the severity of those ones, so of the fires, so how much damage that they do, has there's more of the higher ones than there has been before. As you can tell by this graph, the moderate and high fires, so the ones that burn most of the acres and does the high amounts of damage, have increased more so than the previous years or previous times. There's still a good amount of low and unburned to low fires, right? Where they make the majority of the fires that we see, but the low and sorry, not the low, the moderate and the high fires have increased drastically comparative to before. This indicates that it obviously shows why this is the case now. So how come fires have increased quite drastically? It's because fires have increased in how much damaging that they are. So this has come to ask us, right? How has Washington been impacted by this uptrend of wildfires? As in America, we can see this in total, but is it the same for Washington, or is it different?
Hi, I'm Olivia, and I will be continuing our presentation with the history of Washington wildfires. This map represents the number of acres burned per square mile. Washington, being in the orange, was 2.55 acres burned per square mile. So we see that Washington has been quite impacted by the rise of wildfires, but how much has it been impacted by? This map shows the increase in wildfire damage by seeing how many more acres were burned. Washington is one of the highest at an increase of 2.75 acres burned per square mile. This led us to look into the increase of wildfires in Washington and the damages they create.
We wanted to talk about two specific fires, with being the Cold Spring Fire, which is the one that I will be talking about mostly, and Olivia will explain about the other one. So the Cold Spring Fire was we chose to look at it because it was one of the most recent wildfires that we've had in Washington, as it happened in September 6th, 2020. So it's been pretty recent, it's not too long ago. It started around 9:45 p.m. and it destroyed 189 acres or so, 189,000 acres, not 189 acres, 189,000 acres of Omak, so which is a city in Washington, and especially like southern Washington, as you could say. And it destroyed around like I said, 189 acres of it. It was contained to about minimal damage, around like with at least to like 95% of it, and the amount of damage that it did was minimal to medium level. So if I would have to show it, it would be the same as you can imagine in the graph, where it was yellow and orange. So that's what this would be on that graph. So it'd be yellow and orange. Again, it shows how the fires that we've having most recently has been around that area, right, around the orange to yellow mark. And I'll talk more in depth about the impact it has and the before and after photos of it. So I'll be talking about the Cold Spring Fire, which is one of the fires that we will be looking at in depth in Washington. This is one of the Washington fires. We chose this fire for mostly because it was the most recent from the two fires and from the fires just in general that is happening in Washington. It started on September 6th, 2020, like I said before. And we wanted to see the impact of the fire that it had, right, with both of the fires. So we used the Landslide Explorer app to look at the different stages of time, mostly using the vegetation index, and it helps us see how much of the area was impacted by the fire. So we'll be looking at, I think it was 4 different times between from the fire, before the fire, after the fire, and during the fire, in a sense. So first, let's get a standing point, just basically a starting point, right? So let's look at the area before the fire. And as you can see here, we will use this picture as a reference point to compare to all of the other pictures that we'll be looking at, right? As you can see with this picture, it's pretty normal vegetation, quite greenery, quite nice. And like I was saying before, this will be our reference point. This will be what we were comparing to. But we will have another one just to keep in mind beforehand, so we can be looking at the other one. So this is what 5 days before the fire looks like, right, around September 1st, 2020. So this the vegetation area has gotten worse, but at first I thought this may be indication of the fire. But as I looked into more and more, especially as I look into the other seasons, it's September, and this I'm pretty sure is indicating the changes of season more so than anything else. As with this one is showing that since it's still quite green, it's still quite nice for the vegetation, and this is pretty normal vegetation for the area of fall, as September is going to be in the fall solstice pretty soon. And it makes sense why it would look like this, right? Having in the mind of being, okay, it's in the fall solstice, so it would make sense why the vegetation kind of looks like this, why it has gotten worse since we just came from summer to fall. And as many of you know, fall is the season where mostly like, like I said, where many of the trees and many of the things are getting, changing in season, as in like they're starting to be less green in a sense, right? So let's jump a little bit ahead in time to September 10th, which is 4 days after the fire, right? Or I should say more so, the fire is still happening, and this is just 4 days. There's no clear picture or clear landslide image of the day of the fire. So this would just be this is the closest that we have. So the fire, since the fire starts September 6th, this is the fire at around September 10th. As you can see, the fire is still going at this time, but you can see the damage that is happening already, right? Just 4 days after it, just the amount of damage that it did, with many of the gray areas showing, a little of the gray area showing how little vegetation there is there, right? So those areas are mostly showing that there's no vegetation, right? The vegetation was just killed off in a sense, right? It was just gone. And a lot of the red areas showing just the damage of it. Like they're severely damaged at this point. That's why they're pretty red. And but the surrounding area still looked fine for the most part here, as most of the surrounding area is still around normal compared to the other one, right? Where, as you can tell, it's still quite drastically of a change with the surrounding areas, but it was not as bad as the main middle area. The main middle area was impacted by quite heavily, right? Um, Now let's look ahead a bit, even more ahead in time, to see where the fire actually started to like pick up and kind of like subdued a little bit, right? Not subdued, but more so, I would say the next picture shows the most impact of the damage it has, right? At this moment, the fire department and agencies are still working on the fire and trying to put it out. So it's because that's as it's still happening. And the next picture really shows just the kind of like the aftermath of the fire, like the true aftermath of the fire. And most fires actually happens. And and it happened around like September 17th, 2020, right? Around that area. So this is 9 days after the fire. And as you could tell, the land is destroyed, right? The land is completely gone from most part, as in most of the vegetation is just gone. It's just mostly just a white void with the picture, as you can see with from here, which indicates that a lot of the land and a lot of the greenery and a lot of the trees and grass and all that kind of stuff was just burnt down to the crisp, right? It's just gone. There's nothing there. There's no life there, right? And in the surrounding areas, it's even more indicative of how damaging the fire was, where it compared to the before, they had gotten severely impacted. And most people don't, most people know that the main area should get impacted, but it was quite surprising to see how much of an impact it had around just around it, right? The surrounding areas, just in general. As the fire did not go to any of those places at all, the main fire was in this white gray void, as you could say. That's the mostly where the fire was to begin with, right? So just seeing how much damage it did around it, and this is only like 180,000 acres of land that it got burned down, right? This is not even the highest amount of fire damage that we've ever seen in Washington. There's another one which we'll be talking about later that is the highest damage, but this one just shows just how severely damaging these fires are. And this is considered a medium to minimal level fire, for instance. So with this point, we also wanted to check out what it would look like after the fire was done. So a little bit how the fire is kind of healing. Not the fire is kind of healing, the land was healing. Like how much of the land was healing, how much of the land was going back to normal. The report said around the 6th, so September 30th, was when the fire departments and the fire agencies were mainly be able to contain it around, like I said, 95% containment, right? And at this moment, so we wanted to see the what it would look like, let's say in October, right? Since it gave us a little bit of extra time before then, and it should be able to heal up a little bit. So on October 3rd, as you can see, the surrounding areas have gone back to a bit of normality, right? Where, as you can see, a lot of the greenery is still starting to come back. It's starting to look a little bit normal, but still not quite drastically normal, as many of the areas surrounding areas are still in the like bright orange, as you could say it as, which shows that there isn't really a lot of vegetation there. It's still being kind of like damaged, right? It's still damaged, but the middle area is probably the most damning portion of it, where, as you can see, the middle area is pretty much completely destroyed. There isn't really much damage that is sorry, my bad. There's a lot of damage that has happened in this area, right? A big portion of this area is going to be taking a long time to heal, and many of the places around it are going to be in panic too, where a lot of the fires here, with the fire here being so severe and how bad it did it as, it is better than before, where the picture where it's pretty much the vegetation is completely gone, but it's still showing that it's going to take some time to heal, and the vegetation is going to probably take quite a bit of time to come back to life and going back to normal, as you could say. So for this one, the Cold Spring fire does show just that the fires have gotten worse over the years, where this one is considered to minimal to medium fires, and this is the most recent one that we've had, right? With the other fires also being around that level too, medium to middle to minimal level, so like a moderate fire, and which kind of shows in that uptrend of fires, right, where the severity has been going up, but the amount has not been, and this is kind of indication of that too. This fire kind of really shows that how what that means, right? Does it mean by, oh, the amount of fires have not been increasing, but the severity has. This kind of shows what that means. It's saying that, like, oh, so this fire has burned 180,000 acres, right? Where most of the fires in the past only burned around 50,000 to 60,000 acres, where this one burned this much and is considered to be just like a minimal to moderate fire.
The second fire we chose to examine was the Okanagan Complex Fire. This fire is regarded as one of the largest wildfires in Washington history. This was a combination of 5 fires that were all caused by lightning on August 15, 2015. The fires came into contact around Okanagan County, burning around 304,782 acres. This is where the largest of the 5 fires was located. And I'll be focusing on this area in my examples. This is a mountainous area. In this area, there's a town, and this line is a road. Looking at the vegetation index, around a month before the fire, this area is very green. The most obvious area being right here on the left side of the road, compared to the October 22nd picture. This is a great loss of vegetation in the area, not only on the left side of the road, but on the right, where another part of the cluster of fires was located. We also wanted to analyze the moisture index for this fire. The area where the fire started are not particularly wet, but this is not unusual to the area. Around the same time last year in 2014 and in 2013, the moisture index of the area was relatively the same. There's a difference, of course, between before and after the fire, the map showing notably drier area after the fire. Wildfires in Washington have increased in frequency, and studying previous fires will help us prepare for future ones. Monitoring their susceptible areas and gathering the remotely sensed data of the moisture index may help prevent the spread and starting of these fires. And the vegetation index data can help in the assessment of damages to the environment and residential areas. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening.